of Can We Please Talk podcast. And Tony Kinnett, national correspondent, The Daily Signal, and host of Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good to see you both again. Tony, I'll start with you. What's your overall assessment of the Marcos Trump meeting today, with discussions focusing on strengthening the U.S.-Philippines alliance and the announced trade deal?
Well, first of all, Don, Mike, always good to be back with you guys. This is quickly becoming my favorite segment of the week. Regarding a Filipino trade deal with the United States, I'd say this is a very welcome advance, not just for economic reasons, but also for national security and diplomatic reasons, given the aggression of China in the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea in general, and the wider Pacific Ocean environment. It's important that the United States is able to strengthen ties with the Filipino government, as we've seen similarly in the British ties to reaffirming certain trade strategies in Malaysia, for example, over the last 5 years. I think that what we need to keep an eye on here, though we currently see a lot of economic prosperity that is starting to come out of this developing area of the world, I think that the cultural unrest that would occur from certain aid routes being cut off, were China to feel its oats, start getting involved militarily in the Pacific, is something that needs to be considered very seriously. And so it's not really a surprise. This is the first major move by the Trump administration in brokering one of these Indo-Pacific partnership deals. And I really hope this continues in the near future.
So, Mike, your overall thoughts and reacting to President Marcos saying the U.S. is the Philippines' most reliable ally?
Yeah, first off, good to see you guys as always on this Tuesday afternoon. I'll echo a lot of the things that Tony said. This is going to be a lot of agreement in this segment because we got to start with the overarching premise, right? That there's a global superpower in that area of the world right now that is our adversary. It's our chief adversary. So it is incumbent upon this administration or any U.S. administrations to treat that as such. And this is President Trump. He met with Indonesia a few weeks ago. They worked out a trade deal. Now we're seeing this with respect to the Philippines and the President Marcos coming here on this 3-day visit. One of my highest takeaways, Tony and Don, was, hearing Pete Hegseth's comments about Monday about the money that they'll start pouring in from the exercises, military exercises to help the Filipino army. Specifically, they're the closest, neighbor to Taiwan. If China were to invade Taiwan, which some experts would say could happen in 26 and 27, we would heavily rely on the Philippines to help us with respect to potentially defending Taiwan if we were to get involved in that conflict. So seeing that take place today, and the president got asked about that, and President Marcos as well, was a two-parter question. And he said, look, I don't care what China really kind of thinks about this. Like, this is what we're doing. And it's different than what Duterte, who used to be the Filipino president, the relationship that he had with China. This is a different stance. There's been a lot of aggression from China, to Tony's point, in the South Sea towards the Philippine Navy. And so, we're seeing this aggression, and this is our longest standing partner in that area. And it's good to see that the relationship is strengthening after today.
So, Tony, I have to ask you, the U.S. is seeking stronger alliances in the region. But the elephant in the room is, at least for me, is tariffs going to make that process more difficult?
So just to be completely open and transparent here, there is a contingent here. There's a condition. If tariffs are used as leverage to negotiate a better buy-in from a country for military alliances, like we've seen with NATO, we've seen from the individuals over in that particular council, especially from the Netherlands, arguing very passionately towards paying one's fair share, then they can be a very effective tool. However, if it is the more Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick perspective on tariffs forever, I think that's going to be a very, very bad approach to negotiating in the region. Again, I do believe that there are some technological aspects of Southeast Asian industrial capacity that do need to be reshored to the United States, or more safely in Taiwan. I think that is, you could argue, a just as important a national security piece of infrastructure as steel manufacturing and refining here in the United States. However, I do believe that by encouraging a strong partnership in which the United States is the older brother, again, maybe a more Teddy Rooseveltian approach to foreign policy than a George H.W. Bushian or a George W. Bushian approach, I think that's going to be a long-term success that not only improves living standards because of economic stability, hopefully sans tariffs, but also by strengthening diplomatic and military buy-in. Again, as Mike pointed out so clearly, that President Marcos is doing far better than prior administrations in the Philippines.
So, Mike, you mentioned the major superpower in the region, which is China. So what is your interpretation? I don't know if you watched that meeting. President Trump saying that he doesn't mind if the Philippines gets along with China while mentioning magnets coming from China to the U.S. How do you interpret what that means?
Yeah, that's a good question, Don. And I did watch a lot of the press conference and the back and forth. Some of it got on some tangents, and we didn't actually talk about some of the things. But the parts that we did talk about, which is that part that you just mentioned, Don, which is about Trump saying specifically, like, look, it's important to maintain relationships with adversaries. You know, this is a good point and a funnel to can we please talk in the latest episode, because I just had a former Deputy Secretary of State on the program during the Obama and Bush administration, somebody that worked for the State Department that was very heavily involved in the Indo-Pacific. And this is prior to, obviously, President Marcos coming to the U.S. And there's a different strategy and approach to President Trump to what he's trying to do, right? Maybe he doesn't treat adversaries as full adversaries, although we're starting to see the 180 that he's doing with respect to Vladimir Putin right now. But he's always maintained this position of like, why aren't we talking to them? You know, Rich Ganell said this recently in a podcast, like the previous administration, the Biden administration didn't want to talk to any adversaries. We're actually going to go try to talk to adversaries, excuse me. So, you know, back to Tony's point, like the negotiating ploy in all of this with the Philippines is about there's a military advantage to it. Yes, we can negotiate the tariffs, but you got to help us in case China does something in that region. But also, you're an independent country. That's your country. If you want to have a relationship with China, we're not going to stop you from that. What we do want to stop is things that hurt U.S. interests, specifically in the South China Sea. We know how much passes through that sea with respect to trade. So I think it's important to say those things on the global stage when there's reporters from all these countries there. I'm glad the president did say that. And like I said, this is one of our oldest allies. And one thing I've been very hard on the president is about the way we treat allies with respect to these conferences. It's one of the things that I've made bones about with respect to Canada and Mexico. I don't feel like that's the way you should treat people, specifically on this continent, from an ally's perspective. But it's good to see that in the Indo-Pacific, he has kind of given a different tone and rhetoric with respect to India and his meeting with Modi. We know he has a good relationship with Modi, and what he's done now with the recent weeks with the Indonesia meeting, and then obviously now with the Philippines.
So, Tony, I'm also curious as to what you think about Trump saying that he doesn't mind if the Philippines gets along with China.
Well, again, I think that Mike's really right on the money here, that when you look at an adversarial relationship with anyone in the world, I'm seeing kind of a Nixon and China sort of arrangement here. And also to draw from Reagan, a bit of trust but verify. I have no issue with the United States engaging with diplomatic talks with anyone. Look at Iran, for example, in which the Trump administration sent over Steve Witkoff, who far more than I felt comfortable with, was essentially offering Iran everything but the kitchen sink if they agreed to certain standards in which the United States directly, not through some UN front group that has been accused of all kinds of things relating to aiding Hamas, for example, in the Israeli-Gaza war. These situations, specifically, the Trump administration sends diplomats over, sets a series of terms, often, again, far more nicely than perhaps I would be comfortable with adversaries. And then at the end of that diplomatic process, there is, if you don't agree to meet us somewhere halfway, then we'll take actions that are necessary for the people of the United States and her allies. And if that's how the United States is going to treat China, I say full steam ahead, forcing China to the negotiating table, not just on their economy, which again, almost leveled the Chinese economy due to the tariff talk earlier this year. Now we're looking at possible strengthening from Pete Hegseth's perspective, Secretary of Defense, in the United States military presence in the region. Again, if we're going to use diplomacy here in a way to say, feel free to work with whomever you want until that diplomacy breaks down, then we take action. Those are clear expectations from a presidential administration that I've seen in a very long time. And I'm cautiously optimistic at seeing this level of transparency. It's very strange to me.
Okay, Mike, let me ask you this. Do you think from China's perspective that this is actually a zero-sum game where if China sees the Philippines cozying up with the United States, it's seeing that the Philippines is cutting ties with China? Do you think China sees this as a zero-sum game?
You know, Don, as you were asking that question, I started thinking about recent conferences over the last couple of years that Putin has said those same exact words. I don't speak Russian, so I'm going to have to rely on translation. But he has said those same exact words in terms of NATO's influence, right, with respect to maybe infringing upon his borders. So the parallel there is, could China see that the United States is starting to make deals with people that are in the region that are, in essence, surrounding them. And what happened in the case of Russia, which we saw, they invaded their neighbor, along their borders. So that's not a direct reason why, but there are other reasons why with respect to what, Putin wants to do with the reunification of the Soviet Union. So could China see it as, maybe an act of aggression, or could they see it to a lesser extent as, all these partnerships are kind of drying up for us here in the Indo-Pacific? What other choice do we have, or who else can we rely on? I'm not sure how to take that, but I will say from the US perspective, this is what you want to do. You want to make sure that you're treating your adversaries, back to what Tony was saying there, right? Like you want to make sure that you're set up and you're positioned with respect to the other countries in the region that, hey, look, let's work on a partnership that is economically mutually beneficial to both of us. In exchange, we will help you in case the known adversary, to your point, Don, the elephant in the room, it's not the tariffs. The elephant in the room is Xi Jinping. So the elephant in the room, if that is the elephant right there, we will help you in case anything happens. We've seen it with Taiwan and the Biden administration with what they did with the CHIPS Act. Now we're seeing it with President Trump kind of shoring up some of these other deals with respect to these countries that are in the surrounding areas of China. So I don't know how China would take it, but I do think that, I know how I would take it, that there are countries around me that, are potentially not friendly to me. So I don't know how I would react on that. Let's hope that China doesn't react in some certain way. But to Tony's point, let's hope they come to the bargaining table and say, dude, let's cut a deal, because at the end of the day, money does talk, and there's a lot of money to be made out there, specifically in the South China Sea.
So Tony, what do you think? I mean, if the Philippines is increasing its diplomatic ties with the U.S., is it cutting ties with China?
No, and I think this is actually one of the key things that a lot of people in the international community don't give Trump credit for on kind of a person-to-person ethos. Mike, if I wanted to insult you, if I really wanted to get under your skin, I wouldn't come on this segment and treat you very terribly. I would instead treat you with complete indifference. I don't know you. You don't measure up to me. Whatever it is you do, I don't care. And you see Trump on the international stage doing this. He's like, so what if the Philippines try to trade with China? What did Trump say? I don't care. I guess they can do whatever it is that they want. And this does, in fact, humiliate Xi's administration, because it's not saying, well, we need to be careful about the Soviets and whatever they think in regard to post-World War II philosophy. It's China can do whatever it wants. They're a failing economic power. They're a failing political power. Their Belt and Road Initiative was not enough. They can't build worth a hoot. They treat their citizens horribly. The slave labor camps are in political upheaval. And so if the Philippines thinks that it can get a little something from China, level at putting China below the Philippines on Trump's discussions here, now you have a situation in which Trump is essentially reshaping who is taken seriously in the Indo-Pacific and who is not. That goes back to what Mike said about the the prime minister regarding India and the Trump administration treating all of these Southeastern Asian allies as more useful to the United States in future development than Xi's Chinese communist government. I believe that there is an indifference here that is pretty incredible.
Okay, Mike, let me get your reaction to what Tony said and his Trump impression.
Well, first off, Tony, it's not that good of an impression. A lot of people say it's the worst impression I've ever heard. But that's the Trump impression. That's the Trump impression. But I will say something about what Tony was mentioning about indifference. And that's something that does translate. I think Tony's right about this. And then I'm going to counter something that he said. He's right about that Trump on the global stage will play the indifference game, right? If I'm better than you and you want to do a relationship with me, I'm not going to capitulate to you. You have to capitulate to me, right? Like, I'm the bigger dog in this room. So Trump tends to do that. Where I don't like that he does that is when he does it with friends of ours, good friends of ours. Let's keep using this analogy, like with Carney, with Canada. Like, this is my biggest critique with him. Like, this is not the way to treat allies, specifically on this continent. And so that was my only critique with that. But I do agree with on the world stage, the indifference part of this. A lot of these partners need us more than they need them. The Philippines is a perfect example because of China's potential aggression into Taiwan or other parts of, out there in the Indo-Pacific. They know that they need to rely on U.S. military. And that's why this investment, that's why you see the 3-day President Marcos staying here for 3 days to meet with Pete Hegseth, to meet with Marco Rubio, to meet with President Trump. I think his comments were, we're looking for a bilateral, agreement here, not only on the tariffs, but on the military stuff, because he knows outside of the trade stuff and making money for the Philippines, he's going to need the U.S.'s help if anything were to happen to a communist country that is, not that far away from them, and they need to protect their own interests. So Trump is playing it the right way, and I'm happy personally just to see more relationships in the Indo-Pacific being forged with the United States.
Well, all right, we got to leave the conversation there for this week. Thank you both for coming on again.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.